Good evening, everyone. Coming to you from Santa Fe, New Mexico, I'm Scott Harrison, Artistic Director of Ironweed Productions, and I want to welcome you to Talking Theater Santa Fe, a series of conversations between me and Santa Fe theater artists, sharing stories about their experiences in the theater and the unique paths that led them to creating theater in Santa Fe. I'm very delighted to have as my guest this evening Santa Fe writer, actor, director, and producer Aaron Leventman. Aaron, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Thanks so much, Scott, for asking me to do this. It's truly a pleasure.
Well, looking forward to it. A little bit more about Aaron before we start. Aaron attended Columbia University's Graduate School for Film, where his thesis screenplay was given a professional reading at the Union Square Theater in Manhattan. He moved to Santa Fe from Provincetown after his involvement as a writer, director, actor with the Provincetown Theater Company. When living in Santa Fe, he's performed with most of the local theater companies in both classics and original plays. Aaron has enjoyed over 30 productions of his plays all over the country, many of which are published and available on Amazon.com. He co-produced an evening of his own short works titled Almost Adults that was met with tremendous acclaim, including the mayor declaring LGBT Theater Day in Santa Fe on opening night for the first time in the city's history. His recent play was a finalist for the Samuel French OOB One Act Play Festival and the Secret Theater's One Act Factor, both in New York. He is currently the producer of a bi-monthly online LGBTQ+ short play reading series through his company Almost Adult Productions, which has been bringing together talent and audiences from around the world. Aaron is also a playwriting, screenwriting, acting, and film history instructor at Santa Fe Community College, a film festival curator, and has a private writing coach practice. He was proud to have been recently chosen as a fan guest host on Turner Classic Movies in conversation with TCM host Alicia Malone about the 80s classic Crossing Delancey. So Aaron, I was thinking when I was thinking about our interview together tonight, I was actually remembering the last time that we saw each other in person
Yes.
was the day before the lockdown. Um,
Yeah, and there was this feeling in the air that everything, the world was about to change. Remember when I saw you, we were like, there was this kind of, it was like great to see you, and also like, oh, what's about to happen?
I
So,
know, I know, I know, and it's funny because I remember one of the things that you said was you said, I think everyone has this feeling that hey, in a couple of weeks we'll be together. This will all be over. It's just,
here we are a year later, just starting to maybe come out of it. But
I know.
yeah, well, I think we all have to be, kind to ourselves that that was a crazy time and nobody, including, professionals, knew anything of what was really going to be at
Yeah,
stake for us. But here we are a year later, we survived. Some of
yeah,
us, and a lot of us are still very challenged. So
yeah, yeah. I know. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's been a year,
yeah.
and I'm really interested to talk about just some of the creative things that you've been doing
Mhm.
during this time. Um, but before we get to our current kind of challenging world we're in, I wanted to go back to the beginning with you and just ask you, what's your earliest memory of just being fascinated with either storytelling or the world of make believe?
It goes so far back, I'm not sure if I could actually say. I remember um, I was very fortunate because I grew up in a family that really encouraged the arts and creativity. And I grew up in a community in Newton, Massachusetts, which had amazing culture, it still does. So when I was really young, my parents started taking me to like, great theater, to foreign movies. There were a lot of great, revival houses, movie theaters at that time. So I got exposed to it really young. And then in terms of like when I realized I wanted to sort of be in the performing arts and then tell my own stories, I remember one summer my parents took me to a music and arts camp in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts, near Boston College, where my parents both taught. And I started taking, these acting classes and started doing like scenes from plays. And like there was no grace period. Like I fell in love with it immediately. It was like, okay, this is fun. I want to keep
Wow.
doing this. Um, And so when I was, one of the counselors at that camp said, we have this children's theater group that I co-run, and you should audition for it because we always need boys. I was 7 or 8.
Hmm.
So I auditioned and got in and did that for several years. So I was in these original musicals in the Boston area with this, at the time was the beginning children's theater company, which amazingly 45 years later is still in existence in a different form.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think when I got into, so I was acting, in that group, and then I aged out of it and, did a lot of high school theater. And then I think when I started going to really like adult, really liking and identifying with adult material in high school, the kind of films and plays I was seeing.
Hmm.
And I think at some point in that, and during that time, I really wanted to tell my own stories and realized that I had stories to tell, whatever my perception of the world and other human beings were at that
Hmm.
time. Um, so I would say it really started quite young and just has evolved as it's evolved. It's something that I've always done to create things.
That's cool. So it was for you though, acting was uh, the initial kind of draw. I mean, the experience when you're in the camp.
Yeah, I think just because I think part of the reason I connected to it were reasons that I was saying, because I had already been watching a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
seeing other actors and liking other actors even at a really young age, and identifying for some reason with what they were doing, even though I didn't know what that meant at the time.
Hmm.
Um, so when I think when you have that early exposure and early encouragement, it really leads a path for you. And for people that aren't and have to really create it themselves, it's a lot more challenging, and maybe that challenge is good too, in a
Hmm.
different way.
Hmm.
That struggle. So
Yeah. So you're so writing and kind of discovering that you had your own stories to tell kind of came as you got older. Do you remember the first thing that you wrote?
yes, it was a lesbian vampire play, and
Wow.
why I wrote that is probably from some like B movie I had seen on
Uh-huh.
like late night television that I was probably too young to be watching, and sort of got that kind of like initial sense of like something that was provocative and
Uh-huh.
daring and bad. So I wanted to do my own version of that. So my high school in Newton North had a playwriting contest, and that was actually what I wrote it for. And I'm sure the teachers in the school were a bit put off by because I didn't win. But and then but if you won that contest, your play actually got produced. And so I obviously I didn't win. And then I wrote something the next year when I was a senior that was like even darker. Again, it was like, my sense of the macabre and
Yeah.
interest in that and the dark side and the bizarre. That was like what initially got me. The sort of like these like early like horror movies I saw,
Right.
like from the 70s, like those are really interesting to me. So that was interestingly what started my writing. And then
Yeah.
I went to college at University of California at Santa Cruz, and I was a film major because I thought I wanted to make movies at the time, and did make movies. I made a lot of short films, but there was a playwriting class that I took, and because I'd been doing theater acting and was continuing to act, I took this playwriting class and started to take it a little more seriously and started to learn like the best practices for writing a play, what the kind of things that work on stage, the kind of subject matters that were like appropriate for me to be writing about at that point in my life.
Mhm.
So I wrote this play that was there was a theater festival in Santa Cruz called the Chautauqua Workshop, which is still going on, I think, and had been going on before then. And I submitted my play, and this director like loved it, and it was like just this play that I wrote about like someone I had a crush on, and it was like this love triangle between these three teenagers. And people, it was performed, and people loved it, and I think because it was just very relatable to that age group at the time. But
Yeah.
that's what started my interest in continuing to write for the stage, because I realized this is kind of like comes naturally to me because I've been doing it for so long.
Hmm.
And filmmaking I found to be, much harder craft.
Hmm.
But particularly the production side. So I was doing both, but I could tell that theater was where I was going to be ending up, that it was really what was feeling right to me.
Right. Did you do you remember from that first that the piece that you wrote
Mm-hmm.
about the love triangle? what do you remember what it felt like when you first saw the first performance of it with an audience?
Well, I do. Yeah, it was fun and completely terrifying.
Uh,
Like I think I might have been because it was like almost too personal, and like probably some people in the audience maybe could sense that, which is probably why they liked it. But I remember being both thrilled and frightened by it, and but also it was like it almost felt like when I was watching it, like I was evolving somehow as a person. Like this is like a way for me to sort of discover more of myself by doing this, by having my work envisioned and brought to life. So it wasn't just like this great like theatrical moment, but it was almost a kind of like
mm,
maturity that was happening for me
yeah,
by watching and having all of my friends and colleagues see it and really liking it. It was like it was a kind of life changing, you know, event. You could
yeah,
say.
yeah.
And
That's really interesting. Yeah, I'm always interested in different artists in the theater, what the feeling is like when you're at an event that either you've written or you're performing in or you've directed or you've done the lighting design for, just what that feeling is like, for something that's, kind of your first time doing it. That's really cool that you just had this personal connection to the whole experience.
yeah, and I mean, because it was, you know, positive, although it was, you know, it was hard at the time. And I remember when I first wrote the play, it was like twice as long as it should have been. And fortunately, the director I was with was like, you need to cut all this stuff out that isn't going anywhere. But it was like personal to me, so that having that process of working with the director was great for me. And you know, and having directed things myself, I was able to appreciate what that process was and how important it is. And that's why involving, you know, is learning about the collaboration that happens in theater productions where
Hmm.
you write a play, but it's not just you, it's then the whole, you know, everyone else that's involved in it, from the actors and directors that have to bring it to life for you, and it has to work for them. And if you're in the workshop, you know, situation like that, you have that opportunity to develop it and seeing how precious that is.
Yeah.
As opposed, you know, I've had experiences where I send my play off somewhere, it gets performed, I may or may not get to go see it, and it's great. But having that, you know, initial experience with collaboration in that form was really valuable.
Yeah. 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 Do you, when you write a play, and it may be different each time, is there kind of an initial, seed for you? Is it kind of story, or do characters? Is it character? Are there particular kind of, are there particular anchors in your story that kind of emerge first in your playwriting? If that question makes sense.
It totally makes sense, and it's something I think about a lot when I teach classes. You know, about playwriting. I always like, you know, say to my students, you know, it's sometimes it's a bit of a mystery, like why, when you write something, why a particular subject matter sticks, and why I might have an idea for something and then try to write it and it doesn't seem to go anywhere, and while something else will really click, and why that happens is sometimes a bit of a mystery. I mean, I think what I've written about has changed a lot. I mean, I think when I, you know, like in the last 20 years, when I started writing, you know, plays and having them performed as a, you know, a somewhat older person, initially I was sort of intrigued by the kind of like absurdist comedies that I really liked, you know, studying and the sort of craziness of life and zany behavior and zany characters and crazy situations, and that were kind of almost sitcom-y at times. And then as I got older, I saw, you know, I really want to write about, you know, situations that are important to me that I'm going through, and also people that are close to me that have interesting stories. And it's hard to know why you get that seed and that spark, but you know, sometimes it'll just be, for me, if something stays with me for a long period of time, you know, if I get an idea and then it kind of, I might write it down, but it might not stick with me, and I might not, it just doesn't seem to like have that same kind of gestation period.
Hmm.
Whereas something that I think about that stays with me for a long period of time, sometimes it'll just be somebody I meet. I'm like, well, that person's interesting, I'm going to write a play about them, or I'll read someone's, you know, biography, and there's a piece of their life that interests me, and I'll fictionalize it and turn it into something of my own. Or a particular news story or event, you know.
Hmm.
I know when I was in my initial playwriting class in college, and our one of the sort of favorite exercises that you know intro to playwriting classes would do at that time was like write a play based on a dream you
Mhm.
had, because dreams have these narratives that can work in theater sometimes or in film,
Yeah.
but they have a lot of meat to them, and if you kind of get to what they're about, you can come up with interesting stories. So I did that for a while until I got sort of like I wanted to do something that was a little more about like the living
Yeah.
waking
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know if that really answers your question. It can
Yeah.
come from different places, and it's just what what you remember, what sticks,
Yeah. 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 One thing I'm always fascinated with about with writers is dialogue,
Mhm.
and just how that process comes about. For you, how does your dialogue for characters emerge?
Well, I think it really, you have to really know who your characters are to be able to write how they talk. And I think the more that you know about them, sort of had writing exercises in classes I've taught where you write like biographies, like you might do for an acting, for a part you're playing. And I think the more you get to know them, the more that you know how they would talk and the kind of things they would say and idiosyncrasies they have, things that they repeat. We all have our kind of phrases that we say that are exclusive to us, as people, and sort of finding what those are, how they relate differently to different characters, depends on what they want from them, what their relationships are. So when you know all of that stuff and what they want, what their conflicts are, again, similar to what you do in acting,
Mhm.
I think the dialogue can sort of come naturally. And, dialogue is easier for some people than it is for others. And I've, through my theater company, read a lot of plays where some people just struggle with that, finding that the way that people talk. And a lot of it is just having a really good ear. I mean, when I was a student, I used to like, we would like have to write eavesdrop on people. There were like those exercises, eavesdrop on a conversation in a park and write it down, and you can do things like that. And it's really just keeping your ear open to the world, you know and
Yeah.
just paying attention to how people communicate with each other. And it's fascinating. It's like studying human behavior.
Yeah.
um, but it takes practice too. It's like any kind of thing you do creatively, it takes work, and the more you do it, the easier it gets, the better you get at it, hopefully.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting because it makes me think too of, yeah, the with acting and that idea of just collecting, watching people, and just like you'll see, like we used to live in New York, and I used to love just watching people on the subway, and you just get these gestures, and like I would like, suddenly I'd be like, a whole world about this person's life just opened up to me because of that one gesture that they did, or something like that, which I remember we had a teacher when I was in grad school, Tommy Dara, who would just talk about how, yeah, he loved um, watching people, and just collecting data, for kind of the creative process. That's interesting about just listening for dialogue. And um, yeah, my wife and I have had conversations sometimes where it'll be like, oh man, I wish we had this on recording because that was like that was like some amazing back and forth dialogue.
Well, and what's so interesting now is because of the cell phones, people are fine having a very personal conversation on their phone right in front of you and like don't think anything of it. And
Yeah,
I have to kind of rethink, because a lot of times it's like annoying and you're like, can you like go somewhere else and have your conversation? But it can be a real opportunity as a writer or actor or whatever, to sort of listen to what they're saying. And it's interesting, and it can be a bit disturbing, but I think that the way that a lot of people live in their own world with their electronics, because it's like an open book
yeah,
for the rest of us.
yeah. Oh, that's great.
To sort of watch it observe, and maybe chime in if you get really ballsy.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, you were talking about your theater company, Almost Adult Productions, and I want to talk a little bit about that, and also wanted to, because I wanted to talk about the LGBTQ plus reading series. And for folks that are watching that may not be familiar with LGBTQ and what that stands for, could you just tell us what that
Yeah.
stands?
So Well, to go through the the letters, L lesbian, G gay, B bisexual, T is transgender, and queer is sort of like an all-encompassing term for anyone that that doesn't identify in any kind of gender normality or orientation normality, but they identify as like another, so to speak, and embrace that. And then the plus we add because there's also other people that are considered as part of that community, like the intersex community or the asexual community or the two-spirit community. So we add the plus for anyone that wants to identify in that. Um, yeah, so we I can talk a little bit about Almost Adults and how it started.
Yeah, I was just that was your first production. Was your first time as a producer, the Almost Adults production of your short plays?
Yeah, that was it was back in 2015, and I did it because I remember at that time I was like my partner and I were thinking about moving, and I think there was some situation why we couldn't at the time, and so I'm like, okay, we're in Santa Fe. The theater scene at the time, was great. Your company had been around for a while. The Playhouse, there were all these companies that were doing things, but I said, I'd love to see if there's a way that I could do my own production. And uh, I had a lot of my short plays performed in different festivals, but I saw that there was this running theme in a lot of my short plays that I figured that they would work really well as a program of like 5, 10, 15-minute plays. So I decided to produce a program of these short plays, and I think I came up with the title Almost Adults because the plays at the time were focusing a lot on young LGBTQ youth, how they were dealing with issues of that time in their lives where they're like on the brink of adulthood but not quite there yet.
Mm-hmm,
And we
mm-hmm.
were dealing with characters that were like that were maybe older than adolescents, maybe even middle aged, that were still grappling with adult issues. And even though at that point in their life they still hadn't felt like they were fully fledged adults. So I thought that was a running theme in the play. So I called it almost the program Almost Adults, and each of the plays, had individual stories. So I, called my friend Catherine Owens, who is a theater producer, and she actually um, helped really raise the money for it, and we got a grant from the Envision Fund at the Santa Fe Community Foundation,
Hmm.
which supports LGBTQ uh, projects in New Mexico and particularly in Santa Fe. And the fund has been used for other theater productions I know since then. And so we went to different businesses and did a GoFundMe campaign, and we raised sort of enough money to do the project. And Warehouse 21, which is of course you're very familiar with, which is now defunct. Anna Reinhardt gave us a great deal and made it possible
Yeah.
for us to do the production there. And it was perfect because it was still a youth center at the time, and our play and our people and our staff were a lot of young people. So we did the production, and we got a lot of interest. We got a lot of really good press. The mayor, as you were saying in your intro, Mayor Gonzalez at the time was an openly gay mayor, and he really supported the project and came and declared LGBTQ Theater Day on our opening night.
Yeah, that's great.
Um, and so we only did it for 2 weekends, and it was great, but it was extremely stressful, and you know what it takes to do a production.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really hard, and I didn't feel like I could do a production like that again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did a bunch of staged readings over the sort of next few years of plays that I just really wanted to do, but didn't want to do them as a full production. And they weren't LGBTQ themed plays. They were just plays I really loved. Like we did I Never Sang for My Father,
Yeah.
Same Time Next Year, Crossing Delancey. And I worked with directors Maura Studi and Talia Pira, and we kind of did them, even though they were staged readings, they actually looked like full productions because of how they were staged, and people said they forgot they were staged readings.
Mhm.
But it was a way to do the production in a way that was sort of suitable with my life,
Yeah.
having a full-time job and other responsibilities.
Yeah.
And then sort of towards the end of that stretch, there was so much theater-wise going on in Santa Fe. There were all these improv performance groups, and it was getting harder for us to find an audience because of the amount of theater that was going on in Santa Fe at the time. So I kind of put it on hold for a while, and then when the pandemic hit a year ago, I started seeing these casting calls for these, virtual theater plays on Zoom. And so I auditioned for a couple and got cast in a couple of them and really enjoyed it. And I was involved in one festival in New York, and I just sort of dawned on me, I said, I could actually just do this from, my kitchen here. And
Yeah.
so I decided to do my own Zoom series of short play programs because it was manageable for me and because I wanted to just sort of see what would happen.
Yeah.
So I put out a call for entries, and I would say over the last year, we've received 500 plus short play submissions, which
Yeah.
shows you how much of a need there is
Yeah.
to be doing anything right now. Theaters have, not even reopened yet. Um, and so I just started to study like what Zoom theater is and how you do it, and getting tips about lighting and best practices and
Hmm.
tech or no tech. And so we started a year ago, and it's really grown. And at the time we started it, which was around gay pride, I made it an LGBTQ program only because, well, I write plays that are LGBTQ themed, and I'm interested in them, but also because I wanted to give the series some kind of identity rather than just short
Yeah.
play program on Zoom, because there's
Yeah.
a lot of those, and there's a lot of LGBTQ themed programs also right now. But it was just a way to sort of categorize it so people that were interested in those kind of plays would sort of know what it is. And we started, and I learned a lot. We've grown a lot in the last year. We've grown our audience a lot. We've had a participation from literally all over the world, and
Yeah.
people have watched it from all over the world. And the great thing about it is that we have videos of the performances that we can then use for more audiences,
Right.
in our YouTube channel and such. So anyway, that was a kind of long. I'm not even sure if that was an answer if you can
No,
give
it's
a question, but
that was really
yeah,
really cool to hear your journey with just deciding to produce some of your own work, and then just what that
yeah,
led to, and then what you've created during COVID. And yeah, I was interested in how um, things developed in terms of finding plays, which it sounds like you're just that's not an issue at all. Just people sent the amount of plays that you've received, and in terms of getting because you have actors from all over too. Like I've seen two of your readings, which are both just really wonderful and just lovely plays. Super diverse, just and the stories that they tell, and the people that are telling the stories, the people that wrote the stories. And it was really interesting too, just to see all the actors and hear afterwards, because you have a really cool Q&A afterwards with the actors and the writer and directors, and hearing where the actors are from and then the directors. Do you tap into kind of like, is there kind of a backstage or something that you tap into for actors for your plays?
no, I mean you mean like a virtual backstage where they kind of hang out before they go on,
Oh
or
no, sorry, like the Backstage magazine in New
yes,
York, like
I
the
have.
casting.
I have absolutely used backstage, and a lot of the when I needed like certain types of actors that I just don't have in my sort of roster of people. I placed an ad on Backstage, and Backstage is like been around forever,
Yeah,
but because of the last year, it opens up your casting to people literally all over the. Like I literally got submissions from people all over the world. And I said, well, I'd love to work with you, but it's going to be midnight your time when we do the performance. Can you stay up, or it's going to be tomorrow,
yeah, yeah,
morning.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so I did use Backstage. Like we, needed, a trans woman of color to play the, Sylvia Rivera, the play that you saw about the
Hmm.
Stonewall right activist, and people like that. That it was just very particular.
Yeah,
And we do try to cast, like, if there's a trans character, we cast trans actors in the part, whatever specified in terms of their ethnic background or whatever. We have to, I find people that fit those parts rather than making
yeah,
compromises. So Backstage has been great. I've gotten tons of submissions, and even particularly for like younger actors. I got submissions from like 8-year-olds. Like, do your parents know you're submitting to this? Um, and yeah, so that, and then I work with of course know a lot of actors in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. So I try to employ those people. And then I've worked with some actors in New York through various festivals that I've worked on out of state. Um, Plays of mine that have been done in other states that I've, would keep in touch with the actors that have been in them. And
Hmm.
but I always say, I'm grateful that I do know so many talented people that are willing to do this. And everyone wants to keep busy right now. Things are, it feels like things are starting to people are starting to get busy again. Like
Hmm.
they're trying to reopen and figuring that out,
Yeah.
and film productions are happening, TV's happening. So
Hmm. Hmm.
but there was a sort of golden time where everyone was just sitting around wanting stuff to do, and
Hmm.
it'll barely get a bit challenging, and it's hard to know what the future of virtual theater is going to be. um, I was just at the South by Southwest conference, which is virtual, last week, and there was a lot of benefits to doing that event virtually because I could go and participate, and I wouldn't have been able to go to Austin right now to do it.
Hmm.
Also, people from all over the world could attend. So there's benefits to doing a virtual event, but then you don't get the in-person live experience that we all love.
Right. Yeah.
So my hoping is it'll be a hybrid of both,
Right.
moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really interested to see what resonates with people in terms of the live experience coming back, because I wonder if it'll be, I don't know, it's hard to say, but I always kind of try to keep open to what it might look like because, I wonder if it initially is like kind of smaller, intimate stories going to really appeal to people, or I don't know. It's interesting to think about, and to me, like to not think about it in a way of like, oh, we're going to get back to the way things were before the pandemic, but just like, we've just gone through this whole experience. And so, what is our time being together around like a live storytelling? What feels good to everyone right now? It's an interesting question to me.
Well, and I think we have to accept that nothing is going to be as it was, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. I mean,
Yeah.
hopefully we can, all, you know, live a safe and healthy life with these new viruses that that are coming up, and figure out how to do that. But I think in terms of um, I think it's just acknowledging and accepting that things aren't going to return exactly as they were, but then what is it going to be? And we don't really know yet. I mean, I'm sort of interested in the kind of stories people are telling now after the last year we've been in, what people have learned from the past year, how that's going to reflect in the kind of things that they're creating.
Yeah.
Um, I just, at South by, I just watched, there were several movies that were shot that are written, produced, directed, and released during COVID that were about COVID. But they weren't necessarily about COVID. They were about like humanitarianism or community or things that,
Mm.
have come up for people a lot in the last year, about illness, about aging, about family. Um, I'm interested not just in how theater is going to come back, but what kind of stories people are going to want to tell. Um, we'll see.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really interested in that in that as well. Are there particular um, are there particular playwrights or voices right now that you're really drawn to? Um,
Um, I'm sort of embarrassed to say that I don't keep up with as much contemporary theater as I'd like to. It's like
uh,
I go back to like the classics.
uh,
There's certain playwrights that have been really meaningful to me.
uh-huh,
Some of whom are alive and some of whom are not. But playwrights like like I remember when I was first in high school and I read The Bald Soprano for the first time by Ionesco, and it completely like shook my world. Like, oh my God, what is this? What is this writing?
mm,
What is it about? And it like opened my doors to what theater was and what comedy was. Absurdist comedy. But since then, I've appreciated that kind of theater, but also like traditionalist, I don't know if you want to call it that. Lorraine Hansberry, Arthur Miller.
hmm.
I loved Terrence McNally, who we lost
Mm,
to COVID last year. Edward Albee,
yeah,
a lot of those great, contemporary American playwrights, Marcia Norman, um,
yeah,
or the ones that have really probably inspired me, so to speak. But part of it is that I when I was in New York, I used to go to theater every week. I lived in New York 13 years,
Hmm.
and you could go to a play for, at that time, it was in the 90s, $100 or $200, or for like $10. And
Yeah.
it could be great or it could be awful, but it didn't really matter. You just would go to something, interesting. And I felt like I was much more in touch with what was going on in the theater world, and the kind of writers that were hot at the time.
Yeah.
And other than watching the Tony Awards, which I don't even do as much anymore, I've lost touch with. What about for you? Or do you have like contemporary writers right now that excite you?
You know, I just did during COVID. I've started reading and just had some recommendations from friends. Just trying to read some, um, some just different voices. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing her first name correctly, but Dale Orlander Smith, she does a lot of solo work.
Mm,
And she's written some really cool stuff. She wrote a really powerful play based on a solo piece based on interviews that she did after um, and gosh, I'm blanking on the young man's name now in Missouri that was killed. Anyway, and she's just written several pieces, and she performs them, and she's an African American, and I believe African American and Indigenous woman.
hmm.
So it's been really fascinating to read her work because she embodies a lot of different characters in her work. Um, a really wonderful actress that was in our production of Water by the Spoonful, Alicia Lueras Maldonado, recommended
Yeah.
Luis Alfaro, who's written this really cool trilogy of Greek trilogies, but he set them in like Oakland and New York and in modern times. Medea, um, Electra, and Oedipus, and he's modernized them. They're really cool scripts. So those have been um, two writers. It's just been fun to read and experience during COVID.
Yeah, I know Neil LaBute did I was thinking about it recently, a play called Bash that was several stories that were also based on Greek tragedies, Iphigenia, and they were like modern takes on them. And
Yeah,
yeah, he's another writer I've really admired, although subject matters are a bit hard to take,
yeah,
but
yeah,
he gets right to the core of things. But
yeah, 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 yeah. But I'm in the I mean, I just I'm in that place too where I want to read more and I want to and once things kind of get going again, I want to kind of just keep aware of what's going on. Well, with you with the series that you're doing though too, you're just getting to read tons of different writers, which is really cool.
yeah, and it's interesting because you know I think it's exciting that so many people are, writing plays, because the age groups that I'm reading from vary from like 15 up to, you know, people in their 80s or above. There. So it's interesting to see the age range. A lot of times when I read the plays, I can't tell what the age is of the person writing it. So it seems like, the the subject matter isn't always in line with what their own life experiences, which I think is really interesting. And it sort of shows that you can't, categorize people or what they're going to write about. But I think reading so many submissions has been really useful to me as a writer and a teacher, because I get to see, oh, this is the kind of play that can work in a short form, or, just structurally what works, what I think, maybe is challenging, and just to look at, the kind of characters people are writing about, what I find interesting, what I think will, you know, are they conveying it well enough to the audience, what they want to write about, or what their point is.
Mhm.
Are their characters, compelling? So it helps me as a writer to read that many submissions.
Yeah,
And it's interesting because I haven't really been in this position before. I mean, I used to work for, different film festivals, and would, watch films and, you know, also learned from that, particularly short form. But being as a playwright, because I submit my own plays to other places, but being on the other side of it, I get to see the amount of competition
Yeah.
that's out there, but also just the kind of things people are writing and submitting, and to sort of experience the variety of content and style that's out there has been really useful.
Yeah. Yeah. With reading it with reading these short plays, and I know you've written, short plays, full length plays.
Mhm.
Is there when you're going, and I'm sure it probably differs from story to story, but do you have like you'll have a story idea and you think, oh, this is a short play, or oh, this is a, let me just see where this leads. Maybe this will be a full length. Let me just start writing it. Do you know what I mean? Do you?
Yeah.
What's the process for you with kind of the short play, full length play journey?
Well, it's interesting you asked me that because I'm teaching a short play writing class right now, and I've been sort of talking about that, because some of my people in my class were like, well, I think I could do this as a short play even though it covers an entire person's life. And I said, well, you can do little snippets, and it can work. You have to give very specific visual information, and so you get the information, the exposition very quickly, and then it can move to the next point in the story in 15 minutes or however long it is. But yeah, it's a good question. And a lot of times when I write short plays, people are like, oh, are you going to develop this into a full length play? And I'm like, well, no. It's
Hmm.
it's I think it's sort of like with some short plays, they do work better in short form. They're just that particular story is contained to a short form better. When you try to stretch it out, sometimes it's like trying to put a small person into a larger person's clothes. Like it just
Hmm.
doesn't fit somehow.
Hmm.
And it can work fine in short play. There are other plays that are that can't really be contained into a 15-minute, 10-minute, hour long, that it does need the development for it to really be potent.
Yeah.
Um, but there are also a lot of films, great movies that started as short films, like Sling Blade, the Billy Bob Thornton film, was a short film he made,
Hmm.
and that developed beautifully into a feature length film. But I think the mistake that some, and because I had an experience with this a few years ago where I had a story that I really liked, and it had a very complicated backstory that I had to squeeze into this 15-minute play for it to make sense.
Hmm.
And the play was all backstory, and it wasn't that I didn't think it was that
Oh,
interesting ultimately. So I think it has to be something that can be told in sort of present time in a short form where everything's happening before you. If you try to cram too much backstory in it, you have to get a lot of exposition in it, and then that can get really, really tired.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just a story that you can tell presently in present time that moves along. And and there are different kinds of short plays. Like there are short plays that are structured as a full length play with a 3 act structure, beginning, middle, and end, just told in a short amount of time. And then there are some short plays that are just like a scene, like there's no introduction, resolution. It's just like a moment in time,
Uh-huh.
and those can work really well too. And then there are other short plays that you see at like variety shows that are kind of like joke plays, like it's like
Hmm.
like a vaudeville, like they're there to tell a joke and the joke happens, and those can be like even shorter, like 5 minutes. So I guess my point is that there are also different kinds of short plays, and it just depends
Yeah.
what your style is and what you want to write about. I find the more successful, satisfying short plays are the ones that do have a real structure, like a full length. They're just done in a condensed
Just done in a
time
short
frame.
form.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have like I know for me, one of the things that I've always been just drawn to in storytelling, whether it's acting or whether it's the plays that we produce or directing, I'm always fascinated with that because I grew up. My dad was in the military and we moved around a lot, and so
Mm.
really like home and what that is was kind of this. How do you define that? For me growing up. So for me, like what is home has always been a really interesting question for me, just in terms of artistically what I'm drawn to. I also have, I've found that kind of uh, dismantling the romantic myth of the American West is like another thing that I'm drawn to, just in terms of stories. In terms of your writing, or in terms of just what you're drawn to as an artist, are there particular types of stories that you find yourself most drawn to either telling or being a part of?
Well, I feel that, when I am compelled to write something, say things I've written over the last 10 years or so, or when there's a part that, I'm compelled to play or that I enjoy playing more than others, it tends to be something that I do have an emotional connection with, and that can really vary. Whether it's, a coming out story, or whether it's about, someone dealing with issues I've had to deal with in my life, like, you know, illness or aging or things in my family, similar conflicts in my family that, that I see in other dramas that I can then connect with, intergenerational stories. Um, but I mean, I guess, stories that I write, a lot of them tend to be about places that I've lived or grew up in, like, urban settings.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
People that are educated, cultured, not that I consider myself that necessarily, but just I grew up in that environment.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm sort of drawn to those things that are familiar to me.
Yeah.
Um, and then also I see the conflicts that come up from those because I grew up in that environment. So I see the sort of, you know, both the sort of benefits and also the issues that come up, being in those kind of environments, that I grew up in. So, but I think it's pretty varied. I mean, I'm interested in a variety of different things, and I sort of, you know I saw this documentary about Toni Morrison a few months ago, and when she was teaching, she was saying she would tell her students, what she said, what would get her students really motivated was to tell them to write about a character that they knew absolutely nothing about, that was completely removed from their experience. So like if you're a upper middle class white guy living in New York City, write about a young girl living in Nigeria and what her experience is like,
Yeah.
50 years ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and she said it really motivated them to keep writing, and I sort of found that interesting because I feel
Yeah.
like I do tend to write a lot of autobiographical stuff, and maybe I'd like to branch out and write about something I don't know anything about and see where it goes. It's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard, but
Interesting.
if you find something that you're really excited about, anything that you're excited about is the way to go.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's belabored, and it's like, well, I should write about this because it's topical. Well, find that angle that excites you about it. If you want to write about some social issue that you think is important, what's the personal angle that motivates you to tell that story?
That's cool. Yeah. That's really cool. Um, Aaron, if people are interested in either supporting Almost Adults or knowing what you
Yeah.
all have coming up, how can they do that?
So there's several ways. You can go to our Facebook page, and if you just search under Almost Adults Theater, you'll find our Facebook page, and that has the videos of all of our performances. And it also, if you look at the post, there's information about a lot of the actors and writers and directors that have been involved with us. So you can do that. You can also go to, it's actually my personal website. It's just aaronleventman.com. But then there's a tab for Almost Adults Productions, where you can see a little more information about it. And then there's a link to our YouTube page where you can watch videos of all of our past performances. Or you could just go to YouTube and just Google Almost Adults and then my name, Aaron Leventman. And if you want to support us, there's many ways. You can submit a play to me. You can say I'd like to act or direct one in one of your short plays. If you want to donate, we're always grateful. I know it's hard for people right now, but there's you can send a message through my Facebook page, um, and if you want to donate, I can tell you how to do it. It's probably hard for me to describe, but we have a PayPal account, and that's usually the easiest way to do it. And it just helps supports promotional efforts, and we'll keep doing it as long as people are interested in it, and as long as there's an interest in the kind of virtual theater that we're doing. And I might eventually, if it keeps going long enough, branch out and do other kinds of plays as well, depending on how things go. Of course, we're in an uncertain time, so
Yeah.
we'll just have to see what, where we're at in the world and culturally. But certainly, we've had a steady audience for the last year, so I'm hoping that'll continue.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I highly recommend anyone that your all's reading series. It's really wonderful. The next one was it April, what was it?
25th.
25th. Okay.
It's a Sunday. They're always on Sundays, and I was doing them bi-monthly, but I'm actually doing them only once a month because it was going to be a bit too much to do it twice a month, and
Yeah.
I find that it generates more excitement when it's less frequent. So
Yeah.
it's going to be once a month, and it's on Sundays at 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time, and you can watch it just on our Facebook page, Facebook Live, or if you go to the Facebook page, you can find the Zoom link information and join on Zoom, which means that you can also participate in the talkback afterwards if you want.
Cool. Cool. Um, Aaron, for my last question, I just
Yeah.
wanted to ask, in terms of your work as an actor, writer, producer, director, like is there a moment or are there moments that you can remember where you feel like this is why I just love doing this? Do you know what I mean? Like for me,
Yeah.
it's to me there's those moments of silence on stage, whether you're in when you're in a play and you just feel everyone in that theater is dipping into the same pool of truth at that moment because of this. For me, that's kind of what it always is. I just wonder for you, what's that moment that's like, man, this is just why I love doing this.
Yeah. So back when live theater was happening, I was in a play at the Adobe Rose Theater. Oh boy, 5 years ago. It was 5 years ago, and it was I was playing a musician, and it was about a string quartet that was going through all these issues, and they were breaking up over
Yeah,
time, and they were told in flashbacks, and it was a play called Opus, and there was my character was dying of cancer, but hadn't revealed that to the rest of the quartet at the time. And at the end of the play, he has this kind of breakdown on stage where he actually destroys this really precious violin that was really valuable, because he feels like the values of the quartet were dissolving and that time was running out for him. And it was this emotional moment that I hadn't actually done before as an actor, where I had to completely lose it on stage and break down. And in that way, and I remember I think it was opening night. There was like a benefit. It was pretty full, and after that moment and the lights went down, you could feel the air, like everyone kind of like gasped when the scene was over. And I'm not saying it wasn't just me; it was the whole moment, because it was this pivotal moment that was so intense for
yeah,
the audience that when it was over, people had to like take a breath. And I remember feeling that opening night and being like, "Whoa." That
yeah,
was, and it was a tiny theater. Like the audience was an inch from us. Like we were right next.
yeah,
I'm sure you've had to do theater like that, and it was great. And you had to absolutely focus and just be in that
yeah,
moment. But I remember feeling that opening night where that the audience was completely with us in that intense emotional moment. And it's why we miss live theater right now, is that we can't have moments like that, virtually. We can have other kinds of moments that are great, but so and it was great for me because it was challenging me to see what else I could do,
yeah,
after.
yeah.
So
That's wonderful. That's
yeah.
wonderful. What a wonderful feeling. Well, Aaron, thank you so much
Thank
for this
you.
time. This has just
It's been a
been really
pleasure.
inspiring and just
Absolutely.
heartening.
And thank you, Scott, to all the work you're doing, that you've been doing with Ironweed Productions over the years, and I'm just grateful to you for keeping it going.
Oh, I really,
Yeah.
really appreciate that, Aaron.
uh,
Yeah, and remembering it's actually 15 years ago, like now, that we acted together in True West, and
yes.
that Kent directed, and Eric Kaiser and Patricia McKay, who's no longer with us, was
Yeah.
anyway. That was a real pleasure. But I've
It
really
was, yeah, and I was grateful to have that opportunity. So thank you.
well,
Yeah.
thank you again, Aaron, and thank you all again for joining us tonight. And if you are not on our email list and would like to join and find out about future interviews and projects, you can email me at ironweedsantafe@gmail.com, and I'll put you on our email list. I also want to say a big thank you to Theater Santa Fe, theatersantafe.org. They have all of our interviews. This is our 32nd, and they've got all of them on their online tab on their website, which I'm hugely grateful for. And they're also just a wonderful organization supporting theater and artists and audiences in Santa Fe. Um, but again, thank you all very much for joining us. Aaron, thank you again very much.
Thanks again.
Stay safe. Good night.
Too.